LeBron James all the way in.
All right, Peter, we got to talk about it since it's been in the news recently that the NBA, or at least Adam Silver is, since he is a very forward-thinking guy.
Yes.
He's deciding that we're going to, or not now, but he's thinking about changing the playoff format from, instead of East versus West, those teams go, it's going to be just a 1 through 16, kind of like a college basketball tournament style type of thing. So in this scenario right now, if we were to do it today, Houston, which is the number 1 seed, would be facing Miami. The Warriors would be facing the Pelicans. Toronto would be facing Philly. Boston would be facing Portland, Cleveland, Denver, San Antonio, OKC, Minnesota, Milwaukee, and then the last one, Washington versus Indiana. That'd be like the playoff format now. And I just want to know what your opinion is about just this game in general. Like, do you think that this playoff format is a good idea, or do you think it's a bad idea?
I love it. I think it makes the playoffs more competitive.
Okay.
From the get-go. And then with that being said, I just think it brings more eyes into it, right? Because think about, let's just put the NBA in perspective right now.
Okay.
The best 2 teams in the NBA aren't going to meet in the championship. It's the Rockets and the Warriors. They're the best 2 teams in the NBA. And there's no chance that they meet in the NBA Finals because they're both in the Western Conference, which in my opinion is pretty silly. Like, why not have the best 2 teams make it to the championship game, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's the point. So that's like, March Madness is so compelling, right? Because you have the 4 best teams by record standpoint or by just rating standpoints are in 4 unique areas, right? So then, or regions,
right.
And then the 2 best teams could technically meet, right? You might have the best 2 teams on one side of the bracket, but that doesn't apply to this format, right? It eliminates that, but you still have the ability to have 2 number 1 seeds meet in the final. You can't tell me that the Rockets-Warriors is not a better matchup technically than any Eastern Conference team making it to the championship right now. So I like it. I think all those games, it just creates more unique matchups, and you have a better chance of seeing the best teams make it to the end.
Okay.
Like, I mean, technically you could see the final 4 teams all be Western Conference. I wouldn't be shocked, you know? But then there's no debate who the best team is at that point. What do you think about it?
I think I'm going to have to agree with a lot of people and say that just from like a traditional standpoint, I think it's a bad idea. The reason why I think it's a bad idea is because if you have these matchups, you're going to have like these cross-flight dilemmas. So like, for example, we talked about Portland and Boston.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long flight back and forth. So I don't think that'll work as well. Another thing you get really is that, to me, honestly, I don't feel like any of the matchups here are that much different than the Western and Eastern Conference, like they were separate as they are now. I don't think, I mean, if we just look at games like San Antonio, OKC, or even just like other games like Toronto, Philly, Warriors, New Orleans.
I mean, of course, some of them aren't going to match up, right? But like just a few examples, like one of the best matchups, in my opinion, is something you're never going to see in the playoffs. Minnesota and Milwaukee is a great series. It's an incredible series. But you're not going to be able to see that. It's just the same way I think that Cleveland and Denver is a great series too. I think that you see like more compelling matchups because the bottom half of the Western Conference is almost just as talented as some of the top teams in the East. So seeing a team like Denver or a team like Portland against Boston, that's a great matchup that you're never going to see in a playoff atmosphere without a seeding format like this.
Yeah, but I think what this also does, it kind of eliminates the Eastern-Western rivalry. So, for example, like Boston, LA.
It just doesn't exist anymore anyway.
Well, not now, but like when these teams get better, eventually they will have that matchup again. Or, you know, some of the big rivalry teams, like if we're talking about Warriors and Cavaliers. Because the Cavs are obviously not going to be a top 2 seed, usually, because LeBron's teams have only been the number 1 seed twice in his career. And, you know, potentially those guys could get eliminated. It's kind of like the NCAA tournament. Like, you always, like, the TV guys will always tell you they want the Dukes, they want the Carolinas, they want all these guys in there because that's what draws them the most money.
Yeah.
But if you have this type of matchup, I mean, there could be potentially instances where a Cleveland might get upset by Denver, and then the interest in the playoffs goes away. I mean, for casual fans, not for traditional basketball fans, but for casual fans, you're losing that huge money market value of how much money you could potentially be earning.
See, I disagree. I think this brings more eyes onto the NBA playoffs. I really do, and I think that being traditional is one thing, right? There's something to be said about we want the NBA to be somewhat like what it used to be. But look at what that's done for, let's say, the NFL, right? I mean, some of the traditional ways of thinking don't necessarily work with today's society. So a guy like Adam Silver has seen, what he's done forward thinking wise with the NBA has panned out pretty much every single time he's tried to change something, like reducing the amount of games in the season. Charles Barkley is up on his high horse every week saying, why are these players so soft they can't play an 82-game season? But it literally is a fact that they can't play an 82-game season. Look at how many injuries there are nowadays.
Right.
It's just the style of play isn't the same. So in the same vein, like this produces an opportunity to reduce the amount of games in the regular season.
Okay.
And I think in the same way that you say, like, oh, the flight schedule, right, would be too much. Who says that you can't have, like, for the first round of matchups, right? You have two separate venues, right, where you have a tournament style. Sorry about that. You have a tournament style setup, right? Just to alleviate that issue of flying. And then you get back into home games, right? Like a neutral ground. Like, let's say it's Madison Square Garden on the East Coast, Staples Center on the West Coast. And you're saying, like, it gets rid of these rivalries with teams like Boston and LA. I think it creates more of an opportunity to foster those rivalries, because when's the next time we're going to see the Lakers and Boston in the championship game against each other? It might not be for 10 years.
Yeah.
So that rivalry, kids nowadays probably won't even care in 10 years about the Lakers and Boston. So if you have a setup like this where, let's say in 2 years when the Lakers, or even next year, let's say they get LeBron, right? They meet Boston in the second round of the playoffs, whereas they might not have even made it to the championship game to face each other. The rivalry is renewed,
Yeah, to me, I think I'm just gonna have to agree with what other people say. Like, I think it's an intriguing matchup, and like in our heads and just like talking about it now, it does sound a lot interesting. And I think it's change that doesn't necessarily need to be changed. I think there's some stuff that are fine the way it is. The thing is, like, we always talk about the difference in power between the Eastern and Western Conference. I feel like you're always going to have that every year, because in Jordan's era, the Eastern Conference was a lot stronger than the Western Conference. I just think that the balance of power will always be shifting one way or another. But I don't think that any of these matchups here are really that bad or like that not intriguing as the ones for East and West, if you keep it traditionally.
See, one other thing I'll disagree with you on, I don't honestly think Eastern Western Conference matters anymore. Like, I really don't. Look at the All-Star game. They dropped it all together. It's Team Steph versus Team LeBron. And not that the All-Star game is indicative of how everyone feels about the NBA in general.
Right.
But really, who cares what the East... Nobody's like me, for example, right? I'm a Knicks fan. Does it mean I'm rooting for the Eastern Conference? No, I don't really care. I'm looking at the players. It's an individual league for the most part. You're rooting for these players, not necessarily, oh, this person plays in the East Coast, so does my favorite player on my favorite team. People just don't care.
Right.
It's the same thing as the East versus West hip-hop debate, right? That was a big thing in the 90s. People don't care nowadays. Kendrick Lamar is from LA. People in New York listen to him all the time. It's just not a big deal. So saying traditionally, why not keep it the Eastern Conference versus the Western Conference? It really just doesn't matter, really. And then on top of that, you're saying, like, the Eastern Conference is weaker right now, right? Everybody knows that. If that's the case, why would you not want to see the best teams in the NBA play in the biggest games? Which, by that standard, the Western Conference has probably 3 of the 5 best teams in the entire NBA. Definitely the 2 best. I would want to see those guys play in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, not Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, but I think the way you're putting it is that I feel like, Houston Warriors, they might not even match up in the finals. Like, they might get, one of them might get upsetted by one of these low teams.
No, exactly, but that's the point. Like, you never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, but I don't know. To me, it's just not going to, because if you get, like, just a, for example, you get, like, an Indiana versus Toronto somehow in the NBA Finals.
Yeah.
The only market you're watching is, the only market that's going to be really watching are hardcore basketball fans, Toronto and Indiana. You're missing huge on a potential big casual fan just being like, oh, LeBron's in the final.
But in the same vein, you could see Indiana versus Denver in the finals. It's the same thing.
Yeah, so
You just never know. It doesn't change the fact that you could have two small market teams in the NBA Finals. That could be the case any year, regardless of conference seeding.
I don't know. To me, it's just like, it's like the same as like Indiana versus Washington. It's the same as just like Indiana versus Denver.